my colleague MP Jenny Kwan from Vancouver East. I'm Leah Gazan, the Member of Parliament for Winnipeg Centre. And I'm here with a number of organizations today, migrant rights advocates, including the Fédération des Femmes du Québec, the Canadian Council for Refugees, the Centre de Travailleurs et Travailleuses Immigrants, Action Réfugiés Montréal, and Amnesty International, who will be joining us online. And we're here to send a very clear message today in solidarity. We're here to let the Prime Minister and the Liberal government know that we refuse to stay quiet as they try and fast track Bill C12, a bill riddled with human rights violations, a bill riddled with violations of international law, and we are here to send a clear message. No, we are not going to be silent when people's human rights and enshrined rights in international law are being violated. And I'm here joined by a number of experts that have been very clear that the bill has not been any improvement on Bill C2. In fact, they are simply trying to fast track some of its most controversial parts, controversial parts, without answering the criticism of legal experts and individuals representing migrants, women, and the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. And it's very clear that this legislation not only lacks a human rights lens, not only it violates international law, but it's also failed its obligation to apply a gender-based analysis in the development of this bill. And let me be clear, this is not the first time we saw the same behavior, the same fast tracking, the same pushing through of legislation as we did in Bill C5, with the absence of a gender-based lens, with the absence of the voices of Indigenous women. And here we are again with a legislation that will hurt migrants and asylum seekers. It's putting us in the same xenophobic direction that's been promoted by Trump. But in this case, it's going to disproportionately harm women, children, and the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Bill C12 places greater restrictions on women and asylum seekers fleeing, for example, gender-based violence, and would in turn force many individuals to stay captive, remain captive in abusive relationships or unsafe working conditions as their immigration or refugee status is made more precarious, even though we know that some of the most exploited workers are migrant workers, specifically women. It would also jeopardize the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, refugees who, if sent back, are at risk of facing persecution or endangerment due to their sexuality and identity. And this is unacceptable. And it's unfortunate that the Liberals don't seem to care that human rights are not part of their agenda, that upholding international law, conventions we have signed on to, is not part of the agenda. And meanwhile, while the Liberals are violating these rights, the Bloc and Conservatives are all too happy to support them in that violation of human rights and international law. It's a very sad time. It's a very sad time as we watch Canada backslide on human rights. And it is a very sad time that the very criticism that we are seeing south of the border with Trump, that our current Prime Minister and the Liberal government are copying some of the most vile, authoritarian attacks on migrants and immigrants. So with that, I'm pleased to first introduce my good colleague, Jenny Kwan, who will provide additional remarks, Member of Parliament for Vancouver East. Thank you, Jenny.
Well, thank you very much, Leah, and I'm pleased to join with everyone here to stand together and to say no to Bill C12. Bill C12 is a dangerous piece of legislation. It's a legislation that violates and attacks migrants and refugees, newcomers, members of the LGBTQ2+ community, all because they are seeking refuge here in Canada. The government brought about this bill ostensibly was to create safer borders, to answer to Trump. But in reality, the legislation has very little to do with safer borders in response to Trump. What it does is propel racist, discriminatory attitudes and to also embark on a process of stripping the rights and the values that so many Canadians stood behind in support of refugees and migrants. The Liberals and Conservatives were none too happy to support this bill. In fact, if anything, I think the Conservatives wanted it to go further, as we have seen at committee, whereby they moved amendments, even taking a further step than what the bill itself presents. The committee stage with the bill, the government, along with the Bloc and the Conservatives, rushed through the bill without inviting experts to the table. Council for Canadian Refugees, for example, were not invited to be a witness. None of these women's organizations here today were invited as a witness. Migrant workers and migrant rights advocates were not invited to the table. And they rushed that through to push forward with the agenda to strip the basic human rights and dignity of migrants and refugees. Bill C12 embeds a stigmatizing narrative that treats migrants and refugees as security threats rather than human beings seeking protection. In its effort, the government stripped those rights with measures such as an arbitrary one-year bar. When someone come to Canada, previous to their most recent arrival, and if they were here in Canada to seek asylum, the one-year bar would apply when they first came to Canada. And this could happen for someone who visited Canada as a child, as a visitor on vacation, who later in life might be being persecuted as a 2S LGBTQ2+ member, or as someone who's faced with gender-based violence, or someone who is now a human rights defender seeking protection in Canada. This one-year bar measure is actually worse than what the United States had put in place. Canada is embarking on this and proudly saying somehow that protects Canada's borders. On the contrary, Canada is passing a law that would be, in my view, in violation of Canada's responsibility and commitment to the rights of refugees. The bill's sweeping information sharing powers, which the Liberals refused to limit, despite clear warnings from Amnesty International, the Canadian Bar Association, refugee and migrant and women's advocates, they are plowing ahead with that information sharing process. Without safeguards, personal data could be shared across governments, government departments and levels of government, increasing the risk of LGBTQ2+ members, claimants or survivors of gender-based violence to be outed and put their security at risk. putting them in even greater danger. The NDP attempted to put forward 13 amendments to provide some level of protection to migrants and refugees, and every one of those amendments were rejected by the Liberals, Conservatives, and the Bloc. Amendments including preventing claimants from being trapped in a pre-screening limbo, to ensure clear limits on documents that the minister can demand, protected vulnerable people from wrongful abandonment of claims, maintain timelines for refugee appeal division decisions, and to ensure access to a fair pre-removal risk assessment hearing, set parliamentary oversight over sweeping public interest cancellation powers, to prevent retroactive unjust application of the new rules. They even rejected amendments to protect gender-based violence, unaccompanied children, and members of the LGBTQ2+ members from being sent back to their country of origin, where they might face danger, violence, and persecution. Bill C12 is being pushed through by the Liberals, Conservatives, and the Bloc, working hand in glove to move this through. Let me say this very clearly. Copying Trump and Trump-style policies is discriminatory, is dangerous, and fundamentally un-Canadian. Bill C12 should be withdrawn.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Now we will be joined online with Julia Sand from Amnesty International. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. I'm here today on behalf of Amnesty International to express our strong opposition to Bill C12. There is a reason why so many people across the country, including many Amnesty International members and supporters, are speaking out against this bill. It is an attack on the values of fairness and dignity that we hold dear. This bill would put a lot of people at risk, including our friends and neighbors who are building their lives here in Canada. Bill C12 would deny people a fair assessment of their refugee claim based on arbitrary criteria. When someone seeks safety in Canada, the only thing that matters is whether they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Instead, this bill would judge people based on how or when they first entered Canada, factors that have nothing to do with whether they need protection. If this bill passes, anyone who first entered Canada more than 1 year ago, no matter how briefly or at what age, would not be able to make a claim for refugee protection that would be heard by the Immigration and Refugee Board. Even someone who came to Canada for a single day as a baby and returned decades later would be denied the chance to have their claim fairly assessed. It wouldn't matter if their country had since descended into war, if their government began targeting them, or if their claim was based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. A date on a paper could decide their fate. We have already seen the harm caused by similar rules in the United States, where their 1-year bar has led to refugees being deported despite having a genuine need for protection. The United Nations Refugee Agency has urged the U.S. to repeal their one-year deadline. Canada should not be repeating these mistakes. Under Bill C12, people seeking safety after 1 year would be forced into a far weaker process. The pre-removal risk assessment, which lacks independent and specialized decision makers, does not guarantee an oral hearing, does not provide the right of an appeal, and does not provide protections against deportations when appeals are ongoing. This would entrench a two-tiered refugee system that puts people at real risk of being denied safety, even when they genuinely need Canada's protection. The bill would also grant the government sweeping powers to cancel or suspend immigration documents, such as permanent resident visas, work, and study permits, for entire groups of people without any individualized assessment or due process. This opens the door to arbitrary and politically driven decisions that could destabilize lives, separate families, and uproot people who have been building their lives here. Across this country, whether we arrived 99 years ago or 99 days ago, we all want dignity, stability, and the ability to plan for the future. Bill C12 undermines those shared goals. Amnesty International is deeply concerned that Bill C12 could lead to violations of Canada's international legal obligations, including those regarding the right to seek safety through a fair and effective procedure, the right to not be deported to danger, and the prohibition on discrimination. We stand today with human rights, privacy, refugee and migrant justice, and gender justice organizations across Canada in calling for this bill to be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Now I'd like to call on Michelien from Fédération des Femmes du Québec.
Yes, I will be speaking in French. Okay. Bonjour. Je prends la parole aujourd'hui au nom de la Fédération des femmes du Québec, un regroupement non partisan qui représente toutes les femmes, pas seulement celles qu'on voit, pas seulement celles qui dérangent peu, toutes. Nous sommes l'un des plus grands mouvements féministes au Québec et notre rôle est clair, défendre les droits, la dignité et la sécurité des femmes ici et ailleurs. Et aujourd'hui, ce rôle nous oblige à dire quelque chose de difficile, mais de nécessaire. Le projet de loi C-12 met des vies en danger. Nous faisons partie du Front commun contre C-12 aux côtés d'une vingtaine d'organisations. Et pourtant, aucune organisation de défense des droits des femmes n'a été consultée. Aucune organisation du Front commun n'a été entendue. Et très peu de groupes de la société civile ont pu participer. C-12 a été construit dans la précipitation, sans écoute, sans réflexion, sans prendre en compte celles qui seront le plus affectées. Et l'élément le plus alarmant, aucune analyse comparative entre les sexes plus n'a été faite. Aucune. Alors que le gouvernement en a l'obligation. Alors que les inégalités de genre déterminent qui survit, qui tombe et qui sera oublié. Nous devons parler maintenant des impacts humains, parce que c'est là que C-12 frappe le plus fort. On nous dit que C-12 est un projet de loi au nom de la sécurité. Mais la sécurité de qui? Dans les zones de conflit, les morts silencieuses, les morts dont personne ne parle, ce sont souvent des femmes. Des femmes qui se privent pour nourrir leurs enfants. Des femmes qui survivent à des violences sexuelles systématiques. Des femmes qui traversent l'enfer encore et encore, simplement parce qu'elles veulent vivre. Et lorsqu'elles fuient, souvent seules avec leurs enfants, elles traversent des routes où l'exploitation est quotidienne, où la violence, elle est normale et où chaque pas peut être un danger. Elles arrivent ici avec des traumatismes qui sont profonds, avec des stress post-traumatiques, une santé mentale fracturée et épuisée par tout ce qu'elles ont dû endurer. Certaines de ces femmes arriveront par des voies irrégulières, oui, pas parce qu'elles veulent contourner le système, pas parce qu'elles trichent, mais parce qu'elles sont à bout de souffle, parce que c'est ça ou mourir, parce que dans un contexte de guerre, de chaos ou de violence extrême, il n'y a parfois pas d'entrée régulière possible pour sauver sa propre vie. Et qu'est-ce que leur dit C-12? Tu n'es plus le problème de personne, personne ne veut te protéger, et personne ne veut t'écouter. Parce que si elles entrent de manière irrégulière et se font intercepter dans les 14 jours, elles sont renvoyées automatiquement. Et si elles tentent de déposer une demande d'asile après ces 14 jours, elles deviennent inéligibles. Cette mécanique-là n'a aucun sens humain. On exige d'une femme traumatisée, en état de choc, qu'elle comprenne des procédures complexes en 2 semaines, qu'elle trouve possiblement un avocat, qu'elle saisisse une politique migratoire qui souvent n'existe même pas dans sa langue, qu'elle le fasse pendant qu'elle s'occupe de ses enfants, qu'elle tente de se nourrir, qu'elle tente de dormir malgré les flashbacks qu'elle subit. C-12, ce que ça fait, c'est punir la détresse, punir la lenteur normale de la guérison. C-12 punit le traumatisme. Et ensuite, qu'est-ce qu'il leur reste? La clandestinité, un statut irrégulier qui les rend invisibles, sans soins de santé, sans services psychologiques, sans soutien. Ce sont des femmes qui n'appartiennent plus à aucun système, des femmes qui n'ont plus droit à rien, des femmes que tout le monde oublie parce qu'elles ne sont utiles à personne. Nous le savons, les femmes sans statut sont les premières à être exploitées, les premières à être violentées, les premières à être coincées dans des relations abusives parce qu'elles n'ont aucune alternative. Elles deviennent invisibles, pas seulement administrativement, mais elles deviennent invisibles humainement. C-12 les efface, C-12 les sacrifie. La Fédération des femmes du Québec refuse cela. Nous refusons qu'une politique migratoire transforme des femmes en nombre. Nous refusons d'être complices d'un projet de loi qui renforce la violence au lieu de la combattre. C'est pourquoi, avec le Front commun, nous demandons le retrait complet du projet C-12. Et si le gouvernement refuse de retirer ce projet, alors nous exigeons, comme strict minimum, que les critères d'irrécevabilité soient revus pour ne pas condamner les femmes les plus vulnérables à la clandestinité et que l'ACS+ soit appliqué de manière rigoureuse, comme la loi l'exige. Parce que ce qu'on défend ici, ce ne sont pas des statistiques, ce sont des vies traumatisées, des vies épuisées, mais encore debout. Et nous avons le devoir de les protéger. Merci.
Thank you so much. I now call on Polly Fontep from the Immigrant Workers Center.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I'll speak in French.
Okay.
OK. Merci beaucoup. Donc, je suis membre du CTI, du Centre des travailleurs et travailleuses temporaires, et qui est militant aussi beaucoup en faveur des droits des réfugiés. Et moi-même, étant réfugiée, ayant subi plusieurs traumatismes et plusieurs abus par mon employeur, et des abus, des frustrations au niveau de l'emploi, des abus psychologiques qui n'ont pratiquement pas été pris en compte. J'ai dû croupir dans ma solitude, dans ma souffrance, sans pouvoir être écoutée. Et de manière fortuite, j'ai croisé le chemin du CTI qui a pu m'aider à sortir de cette situation, sortir entre guillemets. Et aujourd'hui, on peut se trouver confronté à une loi, la loi C-12, qui ne nous favorise pas parce que dans mon cas est un cas isolé parmi tant d'autres. Il y a plusieurs autres immigrants, et notamment des femmes, qui vivent ces mêmes abus, ces mêmes traumatismes, et qui ne savent pas à qui faire recours. Donc, cette loi arrive dans un moment vraiment critique et qui met tout le monde KO. Qui hypothèque des vies, qui hypothèque des projets de vie, parce que l'immigration est comme un projet de vie. On quitte nos pays d'origine, on abandonne tous nos emplois, nos familles, pour venir contribuer à l'évolution du Canada. Parce que, par exemple, moi, je suis arrivée comme pendant la pandémie, où le système de santé était vraiment fragilisé. Et parmi moi, il y a plusieurs autres qui sont arrivés dans ce même cas pour prêter main forte pendant la pandémie, et qui ont trouvé le Canada comme une terre propice pour pouvoir s'établir. Mais avec ces lois qui viennent aujourd'hui, on se demande, est-ce que ce projet est encore vivable? Est-ce que c'est vraiment un rêve de venir au Canada ou ça devient un cauchemar? Donc, et dans les personnes migrantes avec des statuts migratoires précaires perdent tout espoir de vivre, sont violentées, sont séquestrées parfois, vivent dans des relations avec des violences conjugales et ne peuvent pas s'exprimer. Toutefois, il y a certaines personnes qui peuvent parfois essayer de sortir de là, mais le projet de loi C-12 ne leur permet pas vraiment d'avoir ces perspectives, parce que ça bloque les autorisations de résidence permanente, ça bloque les autorisations de demande d'asile, ça bloque plusieurs choses, et ça donne le droit au gouvernement de pouvoir aller même fouiller dans leur vie personnelle, ce qui n'est pas humain. Donc, nous sommes face à une incertitude, des stress lourds, des suspensions, des annulations, des dossiers de résidence permanente, de résidence temporaire, et aussi, est-ce que c'est au nom de l'intérêt public ou c'est au nom de l'intérêt de l'intérêt humain? Est-ce qu'on regarde à l'intérêt gouvernemental ou est-ce qu'on regarde à l'intérêt humain? Parce que je pense que le Canada est un pays où on a parlé un pays de droit. Et il y a la Convention de Genève qui est également votée par le Canada. Où est-ce que le Canada met la Convention de Genève si on accepte le projet de loi C12, si on accepte de voter le projet de loi C12, où est-ce qu'on met la Convention de Genève? Donc, ce que nous demandons, c'est que le projet de loi ne soit pas accepté. Parce que les personnes vont vivre dans plus de frustration encore. Des personnes vont vivre dans l'inhumanisme des services frontaliers. Des personnes vont être exposées. Et puis les vies, non seulement des femmes, mais également des réfugiés entiers vont être comme, entre guillemets, vont être hypothéquées. Or, nous sommes en train de bâtir la génération d'aujourd'hui, les femmes d'aujourd'hui sont en train de bâtir une génération pour demain. Mais si nous acceptons que ce projet soit voté, est-ce que nous pensons aux conséquences que cela peut apporter dans l'avenir du Canada demain, dans l'avenir des immigrants demain également? Parce que les immigrants également constituent comme une main forte pour le développement du Canada. Donc, nous demandons la mise en place, nous demandons aux députés, aux sénateurs et aux sénatrices de voter contre ce projet de loi. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. I will now call on Maria Juliana Prieto Gracia from Action Refugees Memorial.
Thank you so much. My name is Maria. I am originally from Colombia, a mixed indigenous Black woman and a refugee. I wish I were not in a position of such vulnerability, nor in a reality where my experiences are so often misunderstood. People ask me what it means to be a refugee. The truth is, it's not a simple answer. I know I am more than just my legal status. Those who have never lost everything, never had to start from zero, often feel the most entitled to judge us. My family has lived displacement for decades, as the first refugee among us was my sister, at only 13 years old. We were raised to value justice, truth, and reparation, principles that guide us not only in our work, but in our survival as women in a patriarchal world. Yet still, refugees are denied a seat at the table where policies about our lives are designed. We were not even invited as witnesses. Today, home feels again like a place of uncertainty and anxiety. Our mental health is almost never considered. No one asks what it means to fight every day just to protect the dignity we have left. As a survivor of gender-based violence, as a queer woman, and as a racialized migrant, I face layers of vulnerability that many will never have to imagine. No one asks if we can breathe the next day, if we can eat, or if we even feel allowed to exist. Bill C12 deepens these fears. It responds to political pressures from the neighboring country, whose policies have already endangered countless of marginalized communities. And now, under the new Canadian government, this bill is being pushed forward without including the voices of the people it affects the most. It expands surveillance, increases information sharing, and even allows the government to deny refugee protection and mass canceling status on a massive scale. Giving any government this kind of power is profoundly dangerous. Canada has international obligations and a charter of rights that promises due process, dignity, and fairness. This bill threatens all three. I have seen war. I have known hunger, homelessness, and despair. I have held loved ones whose lives were taken by violence. I have been closer to death at 20 years old than many people in this room ever will be. And while I am grateful to be safe in Canada, I am also deeply saddened. After crossing borders in search of life, after enduring indignity, after writing nearly 200 pages to prove that I deserve safety as a social leader and a human rights defender, I now face a bill that puts my existence and the existence of so many others back into question. When will be enough for you? None of us reject the idea of security, but this bill goes far beyond. You don't even agree among yourselves on what public interest means. And as people trained in law, you know how dangerous vagueness and ambiguity are. This can result in arbitrariness. So we ask respectfully, please stop speaking without us and speaking about us. You cannot create policies that determine our futures without giving us even a single seat at the table. Refugees have agency. We think, we contribute, we build communities, just like every one of you seated in Parliament. We are graduates, researchers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, philosophers. But above all, we are human beings. And like every one of you, we deserve more than just survival. We deserve to live without fear, to breathe without anxiety, to walk without danger, to love and to hope without apology. I hope when you go home tonight, you close your eyes and imagine what it feels to be haunted, silenced, and erased because of who you are, where you were born, or what you believe in. That is the reality of us live. And we ask you here and now, please don't turn away from us. Do not let us fade. Do not let us die in silence while laws like this threaten our very right to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to call on Gowri Srinivasa from the Canadian Council for Refugees.
Good morning. It's hard not just to take a minute to listen to the profound truth we've just heard. The Canadian Council for Refugees is the leading national voice on refugee policy in Canada. We represent over 200 frontline refugee-led and allied organizations across the country. You have heard powerfully from several of them already. Today, I am proud to be joining many colleagues across civil society to express our clear concern as a national coalition, to sound a warning bell to Canadians that Bill C12 represents a sharp departure in our proud legacy as a country of welcoming refugees and migrants to safety here, to build new lives and to build our country as they have throughout our history. In particular, we want to highlight that this bill upends decades of leadership from Canada to champion and protect women's rights, gender equality, and gender diverse populations. We asked to share these concerns before both parliamentary committees studying the bill, and we, like so many others, have been shut out. Merci donc au NPD et aussi pour le Parti vert pour nous avoir écoutés et invités dans ces forums alternatifs. Nous sommes ici dans les lieux qui nous sont accessibles pour lancer notre appel au gouvernement et aux partis d'opposition qui dominent le processus afin qu'ils ralentissent, écoutent notre témoignage et examinent les implications de ce projet de loi. The bill claims to be about enhancing public safety and tightening the efficiency and integrity of the immigration system. But as you have heard today, Bill C12 proposes, in fact, a radical overhaul of our refugee protection regime, with measures that will make many people in Canada less safe, and it will contravene Canada's human rights obligations under domestic and international law. It is not an overstatement to say that this bill would not survive a constitutional challenge as currently drafted. Ironically, as C12 works so hard to construct roadblocks to prevent refugees from accessing Canada's current and world-class system for adjudicating claims, it simultaneously creates ineffective and duplicatory structures to assess those same claims by the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, while generating new backlogs both at the Immigration and Refugee Board and at the Federal Court. This is the cost and the tragedy of a bill that is being rammed through Parliament this week without the advice and lived expertise of those who will live with the consequences. The damage to refugee lives, to the public interest, and to the law itself is significant. The bill will increase costs to the public purse. It will put thousands of people in limbo without status in this country, driving them underground. And it will risk lives by vastly increasing the likelihood that a refugee could be returned to face the persecution they flee. As you have heard, women, gender-diverse individuals, and survivors of gender-based violence will be some of the most negatively affected. Why? Because a rigid one-year timeline to be able to ask for protection punishes those populations who require time to deal with trauma, to escape abusers, to gather the evidence for their case while trying to navigate significant financial and other barriers in Canada. Unaccompanied minors, or those whose country conditions change, also all declared ineligible after an arbitrary one-year timeline. International human rights law is clear, as you have heard. Your right to seek asylum is not subject to how you arrive or when you came. When you cross borders, your rights come with you. Full stop. And this is what I or any of us would want to count on if your families were in danger. So Bill C12 reflects a dangerous turn towards a US-style security framing, tries to create fear and grow hate. It is not who we are or who we want to be. In Canada, we reject those who use divide and conquer tactics to turn us against our neighbors, and we are proud to be a country that welcomes refugees. We expect our leaders to carry on that legacy and make this a place where all families can thrive. Bill C12 does not honor that commitment. The bill should be withdrawn in its current form, and we urge MPs to vote against it this week. But if this problematic bill is instead handed over to the Senate, the second House of Parliament will become a crucial opportunity for changing tracks, an opportunity to move towards transparency, accountability, and desperately needed sober second thought. Senators, if this bill comes to you, we are counting on you to ensure access for civil society and for the voices of migrants, refugees, and their organizations to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the participants today. This is a crisis. This bill will result in crisis for so many people deserving of safety. I, along with under the lead of MP Kwan, will do everything in our power to push against this racist, draconian legislation that puts people's human rights at risk. And with that, we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do not see any questions in the room, and there are also none online. So I think with that, we will conclude today's press conference. Thank you so much.